This is a response to paxguerilla, your video paxguerilla on objectification, I think it was called, something like that. And I was particularly interested in the bit you said in the middle of that somewhere, where you were making the connection between objectification and ownership, or objects and ownership. The sense that we all have bodies, our bodies are kind of objects, and we know that one of the relationships we have to the body as an object is one of ownership. You know, there's a mineness quality to it, isn't there? It feels like it's mine, and I say it's my arm, my leg, my head, my bladder, my bowels, and all the rest. You know, that's it's definitely an owned object, and I think that does feed into the interpersonal kind of objectification thing, and the various political dimensions to that. And I think there's a couple of things to say about that. I mean, firstly, there's this thing about what constitutes ownership, because ownership, to my mind, has two broad there's two broad ways of looking at ownership, which are quite different, and how those two kinds of ownership feed into interpersonal relationships are different. I mean, firstly, there's a kind of ownership which is very familiar to us, I suppose, in the developed world, which is ownership dependent upon disposability. You own something if it's within your gift to dispose of that thing. You know, I own Phoebe, weirdly enough. I own her, which means I could take her to the vet and get her put down, or I could sell her, or I could give her away if I chose to. There's lots of things I couldn't do with it. I don't have complete carte blanche on what happens to it. But ownership, intimately related to disposability. And the same thing with everything else. You know, I own this Boston Red Sox hat, which means I can give it away, or I can sell it, or I can just throw it in the river if I choose to. It's mine to dispose of. And there's a way of looking at the body that's like that, isn't there? It's mine to dispose of. I do have the right to take away my own life, which is a way of disposing of the body. I can donate my kidney. I can give my eyeballs away at my death. I can give parts of my body away before I die. I can give my blood away. I might even be able to sell my blood or sell parts of my body. You know what I mean? So it has that kind of relationship, a relationship of ownership. It's an ownership based on disposability. But then there's this other kind of ownership, isn't there, which is more like stewardship or something like that. It's not one I think that we tend to have in the developed world very much, but I think it's quite real in a sense, which is when you own something, it's not yours to dispose of, it's yours to be responsible for. I think traditional societies have that in relation to land. Again, in the developed world, land is something that's ours because we can dispose of it. In other kinds of more traditional societies, land belongs to the people who live on it, in the sense that they are responsible for its care and its stewardship. You have that kind of relationship to it. So instead of it being about disposability, it's about responsibility. And there's something of that going on with one's own body, isn't there? Or even with the dog, actually. I haven't said, let me just cut to Phoebe again. Because yes, I have a disposability relationship of ownership to Phoebe. As I said, I can dispose of her at my will, more or less. But I also have one of responsibility. My owning Phoebe, my paying the 50 quid for her when I went to the pound to pick her up, means that I have to take care of her. And I have to feed her, I have to take her for walks, and you know, make sure she doesn't ride in front of traffic. You know, I have that kind of a relationship to her. Does that make sense? And the same thing with one's own body, I think, to an extent. Nothing like the same extent. But, you know, if you abuse your own body, it's kind of considered a bad thing, isn't it? You know, you're supposed to look after yourself. That's how we kind of phrase it to one another, don't we? You are responsible for your own health. And if you shirk that responsibility by just living off fast food, or taking far too many drugs, or not doing any exercise, or deliberately hurting yourself, it's considered a kind of bad form, really, because you haven't done your job right. You haven't taken on the responsibilities of the ownership of that body. So those are the two forms of ownership, I think, which I do think relate to the body as an object. With us, I think, in the developed world, certainly the disposability one being most significant. You know, because we put our bodies and everything else we own in transactions, don't we? We carry out transactions as part of that ownership. Whew, God, I'm sweating. I ate a whole onion this morning, it makes me really sweat. Come on, peeps. Anyhow, how does this relate to kind of interpersonal objectifications? Yeah, we can look at our own bodies as objects and we can think we can dispose of them or be responsible for them, but what about other people's bodies? I think the first thing is to do with, in general, who owns that body. You know, if you have it's fine to kind of objectify someone else's body as long as you don't in some way assume any kind of ownership for it or even responsibility for it. I think, maybe, I don't know, I'm just kind of making this up as I go along really. But it seems to me, if I was to look at let's say a woman's body, since that's where this conversation started, if I was to look at a woman's body and assume some kind of rights to ownership, you know, even if I'd been in a relationship with this person for hours, days, weeks, months, years, then that would clearly be a certain kind of objectification, which is probably negative. And maybe even if I looked at that person's body as an object of ownership, with that ownership couched in terms of responsibility, not disposability. You know, not only not mine to dispose of, not mine to enter into transactions with, to put a price value on, to exchange for other objects and services, but if to assume a responsibility for. I mean, in a way that's possibly slightly more benign, but there's still some oddities around that, because they own their body, you know what I mean? It's almost as if you're squabbling over ownership rights. They own their body. Whether it be a disposable item or whether it be a responsibility, the ownership still should lie with them. And I think it's when our interactions transgress those ownership rules, and particularly when they fall into the confusions of an ownership based on disposability, that's where I think when the problems start. I think. What do you think? Am I talking shit? Anyhow. Come on, Phoebe. Let us take our disposable bodies up the hill. Up the hill, backwards.